Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs, like Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, which provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership training and mentors. And Journey to Esquire, the blog, which provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com. Hi, it's Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and executive director of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the nonprofit behind this podcast, and Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, and Journey to Esquire, the blog. Today, I am so excited. We are passing the mic to an absolute pioneer in the Tampa Bay legal community, Judge Claudia Isom. Judge Isom became a member of the Florida Bar in 1975, and she was elected to the Judiciary and served as a circuit judge in the 13th Judicial Circuit for 28 years before retiring in December 2018. She currently serves as a senior judge. During her judicial career, she served in family law, criminal justice, felony, juvenile delinquency, juvenile dependency, circuit civil. She was in the East Division out in Plant City. She did probate, guardianship, and trust. And so she has covered a lot of different areas of law. She also chaired the Florida Bar Standing Committee on Professionalism and the Rules of Judicial Administration. She served on the Florida Bar Rules of Civil Procedure and the Code and Rules of Evidence Committee. She's a member and past president of the Tampa Bay Inn of Court and serves as a judge member of the 13th Judicial Circuit Diversity Team for 8 years following the Supreme Court's creation of Court Diversity Team. She also served on the Hillsborough County Bar Association and currently serves on the Standing Committee for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So we want to welcome you, Judge Isom.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an awesome having you. I had to cut your bio short because you have done so many outstanding things. So I want to encourage our listeners to read the show notes so you can see all the things that you have done in your decades-long career. Thank you so much for being here with us and being willing to share your journey to Esquire. Now, I know you've shared it before because I've read it in several different lawyer magazines, but I think this is one of the few times you're going to be like the exclusive guest sharing your journey to Esquire. So we want to hear about, what made you want to become a lawyer?
Well, the short answer is my dad lost an election. My dad won an election. There was something called the Kennedy landslide in Iowa. I'm originally from Iowa. And Democrats won in areas where they had never won before. My dad won. He was a state representative. He went to Des Moines, where the capital is, and he was voted most outstanding freshman representative, and we were very proud of him. When it came time for him to run for re-election, a man who I respected in the community, an attorney, a member of the opposing party, came out and said, "Dale, I know I'm your friend, but the party needs me. So I'm going to run against you." And he did, and he was the majority party in our area, and he beat Dad. And that was really kind of a crystallizing experience for me because I perceived attorneys as having, I guess, an entree into the administration of our country, control, if you will. I saw him as being a person who had an ability to do things in the community just because of his position. And he was a good attorney, and I think he was a very good man, but that was a time when partisan politics were not as divisive as they are now. Now it seems like people are on opposite sides of a gulch. And in the middle of the gulch, there's very few people willing to link arms and work for the common good. But back then it was possible to be a friend of somebody of the opposing parties as long as you had the same goals and beliefs. So anyway, the short answer is that happened to my dad. And I thought I needed to be an attorney because my father's primary role in the community was he was a farmer. He was a college-educated farmer, and he did end up teaching later on during his career and working for the U.S. government. But at that point in time, he was a farmer. My mother was a teacher. She started out as a music teacher, and then when she got rheumatoid arthritis, she decided to be a librarian, and she ended up being my high school librarian. And so, as I tell people, I never had a choice about getting good grades because she knew what grade I'd gotten on a quiz or a test before I did, because she'd find out in the coffee room. They'd say, Esther. So I had that kind of family motivation and support. My guidance counselor, we had a guidance counselor for our little high school. I graduated in a class of 72 people. So it was a small high school. Our junior high and our high school were in the same building. And I was really flailing around when I was a junior in high school. And I went to her and I said, what should I be? What career should I pursue? And she said, well, you can be anything you want. And so that's hard. If she would have said, you should be a teacher because your mom's a teacher, I would have gone, I don't want to be a teacher. She would have said, you should be a farmer because your dad's a farmer. I would have said, I don't want to be a farmer. But she said, you could be anything you wanted. And I said, well, what am I good at? And she said, well, you're good at taking standardized tests.
That's funny.
So that was my direction from my guidance counselor. Back then they had an interest test blank that she could use for kids like me who were looking for some guidance as to what they should do next. And it was during the Vietnam War. So a lot of people I graduated with went to college that probably were just hoping not to go to Vietnam, So it was 1969. And so I took the interest test blank, and it turned out, I found out later on that the government paid for this. So I tested as being interested in being an art teacher, a forest ranger, or an officer in the U.S. Army.
Interesting. So we see where the U.S. government played a role in that one.
But my dad had been in the Air Force. If it had said Air Force, I might have decided I needed to go into the Air Force. But anyway, I wanted to be a lawyer. I was bookish. And so I pursued that. Undergraduate, my parents, I was very lucky. Both my parents are college graduates. And they said, if you get a teaching certificate, we'll pay for undergraduate. And of course, it cost very little to go to public university back then. I really have so much sympathy for kids today having to fund their college and their law school education, because the student loans you end up graduating with really are an albatross around their necks, and they curtail them being able to be the kind of lawyer that they really want to be, because they have to take a job and start paying off those loans. But I was lucky. My parents were willing to pay for undergraduate as long as I got a teaching degree, because my mom said a teaching degree was a farm wife's insurance policy. If something happened to your husband or something happened to your marriage, you could always teach. So I decided I wanted to go through in 3 years. I knew I wanted to go to law school. And because I had a really good education, Iowa back then was #1 in the literacy field for the nation. I was able to pass out of a lot of the core requirements, plus get college credit for doing well on those standardized tests. So see, my guidance counselor was right. I do really well. So I passed out of art appreciation, music appreciation. I passed out of chemistry and biology, passed out of history, a lot of stuff that I really wish I had now, because I didn't really get that kind of universal education that you should get in college. But I was bound and determined to go to law school. So I went through in 3 years. I got my degree in education. I got my teaching certificate. And when I was about halfway through my 3rd year of college, I started applying to law schools. Well, back then there was an LSDAS book, and it told you based upon your GPA and your LSAT scores, this is where you should get in. So I applied to a lot of schools, including Iowa, thinking that I would have my choice of schools. Well, unbeknownst to me, there was still a quota system in existence at that time, and a lot of law schools accepted the first qualified 10 or 20 women that applied, and then just gave a pass to the rest of the women. And I was fortunate because I applied to FSU. And I applied to FSU because I had a political science professor who was a mentor back before mentoring was something that we talked a lot about. And he told me that I should apply to FSU because the first dean of the FSU Law School was from Iowa, Dean Mason Ladd. And he had gone down to Tallahassee to start the law school, and he had hired other people from Iowa and the Midwest to come help him start this new law school. And you've probably heard of Professor Charles Earhart on evidence.
Yes, he's very, very famous on Florida evidence. All evidence, but in particular Florida evidence. So, yep, look him up.
Yeah, and he's from Iowa.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and he had been one of Mason Ladd's proteges. So he talked him into coming down to Florida and helping him start this law school. And the year before I started FSU, they hired their first woman, Patricia Dorr. Now, Patricia Dorr, if your listeners look her up, she doesn't really get the kind of credit that she should get on the internet because she was the first female law professor there. And the second year she was there, she was put on the admissions committee. And she and this other fellow had a deal. He was ex-military. And she said, for every underqualified veteran that we admit, we're going to admit a qualified woman, because FSU still had a quota when Professor Dorr started as well. And so she entered into that pact with him. And the joke she had was that she's responsible for me meeting my husband, because even though my husband was a stellar law student, he was kind of social undergraduate. So he was an Air Force veteran, and he got in under David Dixon's rule, and I got in under Patricia Dorr's rule. So we met our first year of law school and got married between our first and second year of law school.
Oh, wow. Well, let's pause for a minute. I want to first go back and talk about, because you said it was hard that your guidance counselor in 1969 says you can be whatever you want. And I'm thinking that's outstanding. Like in 1969 to tell a young woman that, what's your thought reflecting back on that now?
That Miss Birchmeyer was too busy with the kids who had family problems to really worry about me, because she knew I had two parents who were really invested in me and my future and were going to back me. And, you know, in retrospect, she probably thought that she was giving me the rainbow. She was giving me the world. I could go out like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz and everything would be sparkling and glimmering, and I just needed to decide what I wanted to do. But at that point in time, I was more about, maybe it's an adolescent thing, about wanting to make my own decision after somebody else told me what I could do, and I could say, but I think I can do this. And I could do it. It was amazing. And I know I hear a lot of people's success stories, and they'll say they're the first person in their family to go to college. Well, I can't claim that because both of my parents went to college and graduated. But I can say both of my grandfathers dropped out of high school so they could farm, because back then in Iowa, your family were your unpaid laborers. So, you know, the family was a family project to be farmers, to plow the fields, plant the fields, harvest the fields. And in Rhinebeck, actually, where my father went to school, Rhinebeck, Iowa, they had special vacations for the farm kids. And I doubt that they do that here in Florida for Plant City, all of the agriculture we have over there. But the farm kids got a different break in the spring and the fall, so they could be there for planting the crop and harvesting the crop. And so both of my grandpas dropped out of high school to be farmers, but they made sure that their kids went to college. And my grandfather on my mom's side had 4 girls, and he made sure that those girls all could go to college if they wanted to. You know, Aunt Marjorie decided she'd work for the phone company, so she didn't go to college. But I think that's incredible. And Grandpa Jameson, that was my mom's dad, he went on to be on the school board. So he was very interested in education, despite the fact that he was not a college graduate. So my parents always said, not, are you going to go to college, but which college are you going to go to? So it was just a matter of me making a decision as to where I wanted to go.
Oh, great. And then I wanted to revisit because you're calling it a quota system, but that term has different meaning today for especially younger folks. So it's this idea that there was a maximum number of a certain group of people, in your case, women, that these schools were willing to let in order, I guess, to satisfy the requirements of law and to just say, no, we let women in, because a lot of young people don't realize law schools did not used to admit women, and the different law associations not used to admit women. And so when you're graduating from law school, now you're in the early stages of them letting in what they considered large numbers of women, right? Even though today women outnumber men in law schools. And then they also have veteran preference, and veteran preference still exists today in a lot of government institutions and other hiring, where if someone served in the military, then they get an extra boost in terms of, you know, being hired or admitted into the school. So now you and Woody marry. You're in law school, so I'm guessing you're enjoying it because you found your husband there. Tell us more about your experience while you were in law school, what it was like to adjust to the types of studying, to be one of the few women in the law school, and then eventually finding your way to graduation in different organizations you were a part of.
Well, that's a lot there. Okay, so my first year of law school, I call emotional boot camp, because I went from being naturally smart, tested well, that was my talent, to being just one of the smart people. And some of those smart people were very highly motivated to be the smartest or the top of the class. So it was really kind of like jumping in the shark pool, because they were all highly motivated, to the point where when I took my legal research and writing class, my first year of law school, there were students who would hide the books that you needed to find in order to answer the questions for the legal research and writing class, or they would steal them. I was given a pen. Two of my college roommates gave me an engraved cross pen, and probably doesn't mean anything to you, but back then that was a really big deal to have my own cross pen. And I, took it to law school. It was going to be my good luck charm, using this pen to take notes. And I accidentally left it on the table when I left one of these large classes that I was in the first year. And I went right back in to get my pen, and somebody had stolen it. So law school was not the warm, friendly, fuzzy place. There was only one public restroom for women, and it was on the 3rd floor of the law school, because they didn't expect to need a lot of public restrooms for women. So that was really different. I felt like everybody was staring at me, because there might have been 30 of us, but there was like another 200 or so of the other guys. And so I really did feel like I was a specimen on a slide. What is she doing here? I even had a guy undergrad, when I told him I was going to go to law school, asked me, "Don't you feel guilty?" And I said, "Why should I feel guilty?" And he said, "You're taking a man's place." And I said, "Well," I was kind of a smart aleck, still am. "If they have the grades and the scores, they can go to law school too."
Yeah, I mean, that idea that you're taking someone else's spot always intrigued me because I'm like, what makes it their spot? Isn't it all the spots the law school spots and they decide who to give them to? But we won't go down that tangent.
Yeah. I was really homesick. I'd gone to University of Iowa. I was 50 miles away from home. I could have gone home every weekend if I could have gotten a ride. My parents would have been thrilled to have me. But once I got to Tallahassee, I couldn't go home. Didn't even get to go home for Thanksgiving. We couldn't afford the flight. And I was just I was gut-wrenchingly lonesome. I was so homesick. And so it was an adjustment. And I went from being naturally smart and not really having to study that hard to being in this shark pool. And Iowa was on a 2-semester system. And I'm not sure what they called it at FSU, but it was a trimester system. So by the time I was psychologically ready to start studying, we were already sitting for the test, So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I did have to learn a whole new way of studying. And I don't know if you believe in fate, but I was very fortunate that one of my classmates and I were friends of the same person. And her name was Jane Rigler, and she went on to become a law professor. And I was going to go to the beach because, as we all know, Tallahassee isn't on the beach, but a person in Iowa going to Florida, I thought I was going to be playing beach volleyball in between class. So I was supposed to go to the beach with Jane for spring break. And she said, "Is it okay if Woody and Ted come?" And I said, "Who are Woody and Ted?" And she said, "Oh, you know Woody. He's about 6 foot tall. He's got glasses and brown hair." And I said, "Jane, you just described 3/4 of our class. Talk about they all look alike." That pretty much was everybody. So we went down and had a picnic at St. George Island, and the rest is my history or our history, because we fell in love and got married that summer and had our first child. Let's see, we had our first child then in 74. So we had our first child in law school. And again, FSU was a good place to be doing that because there was an apartment complex across the street. So I had a babysitter for when I was in class, and they had swim lessons for infants. So Amber learned how to swim when she was still, I think, 3 months old. Anyway, so I'm going on and on. Your turn.
Well, I love hearing it because that's, a lot of students now have kids already when they're going into law school or are doing what you're doing. They're falling in love and deciding to start a family. So it's great to hear that that's been going on for a long time, and there's, it can work, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. As someone who I have a 1.5-year-old now, those sleep deprived nights get really, really rough. But as we both know, practicing law is way harder than law school. As hard as law school feels while you're in it, the practice of law is harder. So now you had to deal with the admissions policies and how they limited women. You're about to graduate and you are figuring out, okay, how am I going to get my first job? Can you walk us through how that process worked for you?
Well, again, I'm an anomaly. I got to really have it all. So what happened was, undergraduate, I'd taken an ed psych course. And part of the ed psych course, we read a book about the babies in daycare that were closest to the window had the highest IQ, and the babies that were in the middle of the room in a crib had lower IQs. And so when we interned out at Pensacola with the public defender's office. Amber was still a baby. And so I was not going to put her in a daycare because, we didn't have those nanny cams back then. So I had no idea what would happen. So I found a family daycare where a lady took care of her that had, I think, 3 other kids, because she was still in infancy. And I think that lasted maybe a couple of weeks, and then my mother-in-law moved down to Pensacola from Lake City, Florida, because she was at kind of a turning point in her career. She was a real career woman. And so she moved in with us and took care of Amber half days, because back then FSU had let you intern just part-time. And so Grandma Mary would take care of Amber in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'd be there to take care of Amber. As I said, my husband was a stellar student. He was on law review. I think when I met him, he was number 3 in the class, and I drug him all the way down to number 5 in the class. So when we were graduating from law school, he was able to get a job. And we went from, getting the VA benefits, whatever we got from the GI Bill, to Woody having a job, and we were rich. We were used to not, there was like a food co-op in Tallahassee, and we'd go get our $20 worth of vegetables, out there, and that would last us for a couple of weeks. So we had enough money. I did not have to work. And so because of, I guess, my education and my emotional wellness, I decided I would stay home with Amber. And presto changeo, before we knew it, I was expecting our second child. So I stayed home with Amber and Jesse until Amber started public school. And then again, the fates really smiled on me, and I was able to get my first full-time job with our state prosecutor here in Tampa. And that was really the beginning of a lot of positive networking for me, meeting judges, meeting attorneys, and really getting my confidence back. Because when you go to law school, you pass the Florida bar, and you're staying home with your kids, you get a lot of pushback from people about not having a job. People really thought that it was a waste of my education for me to stay home with my kids. And of course, you want your kids to know who you are, and you want to know what your kids' favorite food is, what their favorite color is. Mm-hmm. Back when I was assigned to family law, when a parent would come in and want custody of their kid, I would ask them, what's your child's favorite color? What does your child want for dinner? Who is your child's teacher? And it was just amazing how many parents who thought that they were the better parent to have full custody wouldn't know just those basic things about their own children. So I wanted to be a mom. And in order to be a really involved mom, I was just really lucky that Woody had a job. So he was able to be the breadwinner, and I was able to stay home with Amber and Jesse. And then I got the job with Judge Salsinas, who at that time was our head prosecutor. And that was the start of my legal career.
Wow, that's outstanding. I think it's important for particularly young women or new mothers or people. I get a lot of questions from women thinking about motherhood and trying to figure out what they have to do. And I'm like, you don't have to do anything. You should decide what you want to do. And if you want to take a break like you did, Judge, it's good to hear that they can work out on the other side. If you want to work and put your child in daycare, you can make that work as well. There's no one right way to do this. I think what's important is the self-determination of deciding what is going to work for me and my family and going forward and doing that. And so your story helps, especially for women who feel guilty and they're still getting pushback, right? If they decide to stay home. I decided to stay home after my son was born for like a year, and it was great. It was, for me, more exhausting than working, actually. But, I got to, like you said, you get to know them more and their personality and really get to bond more with them because you have more time. But, we might get some pushback. Like, well, what did you get all that education for then? It's like, I can still be a lawyer. All that education did not fall out of my ears just because I took a few years off. So now you're working as a prosecutor. And you mentioned E.J. Salsinas, who, was a judge as well, an appellate judge. And he also hired a lot of pioneering attorneys in Tampa Bay, Delano Stewart, I think. Well, he helped kind of coordinate some of that. George Edgecombe, who the Tampa courthouse is named after, he made a lot of these initial hires of people who were the first or one of the few or one of the only at the time that they were hired. in that very important role as a prosecutor. So, how does your prosecutor job now transition into you becoming a judge? Because there's still a lot of, I guess, lagging between like the fact that most students in law school are women, but you look at things like judicial positions, heads of law firms, heads of government positions, and we're seeing there's a big gap in terms of the male-female ratio. So talk to us about your journey to becoming a judge.
Well, so I was sworn into the Florida bar October 23rd in 1975, and I went to work for EJ the first working day after Veterans Day in 1979. So I took 4 years off. I took a gap 4-year break. And when I started with EJ, I started in misdemeanor intake. And I have tried all different kinds of childcare. So if you want to talk about challenges, trying to find the right daycare for your children has been a real experience for us too. So I worked for EJ for 3 years, and then my hormones were raging. I don't know. I wanted to have another child. So again, I took maternity break. And by the time I was ready to come back to work, I called up Susie Beam and I said, Susie, I'm ready to come back to work. And she said, honey, you don't think we held that job for you, do you? So EJ, he was a politician, and he hired everybody's kids, grandsons, nephews. He was a one-man, whatever, machine when it came to making sure that people had a job when they graduated from law school. And so that was that option. I just kind of assumed Florida state law back then had a rule about being able to take maternity leave even if you weren't paid. And so I got a call from a guy that I had impressed when I was head of the juvenile division. And he said, my boss needs a lawyer. So I never even applied for the next job that I got. So it's good to be wanted. That's what I always tell people. It's good to be wanted. And so I was district legal counsel for Health and Rehab. Florida at that time had a consolidated social service agency that handled everything from elder to veterans to juvenile delinquency, juvenile dependency, to children's medical services, to all of the health departments. And I was the regional counsel for them. It was a great experience because not only did we go to court for the juvenile work, but we coordinated with counsel when HRS got sued over personal injury type of matters, represented the agency when we got sued over employment grievances, represented the agency in requests for bid, contract negotiation. It was just a large variety of experience that I guess you would have working for any kind of big corporation, with the exception that I also got to do a little bit of litigation while I was doing that. So I worked for them, and then my husband was ready to leave the large law firm he was working with and decided that I would go work with my husband. We had another partner, and he was doing plaintiff's personal injury. He had done insurance defense as being part of the large law firm, and he was going over to plaintiff's personal injury. So I went to work with him, finally partners in life, partners in law. And I also trained as a mediator. I think Susan Bucklew got appointed to the county bench. And so finally, Hillsborough had a female judge. She got appointed to the county court bench, not to the federal bench. And so that gave other women that I'd worked with the courage to start applying for judgeships and running for judgeships. And in Florida, the beauty of being a trial court judge is that even if you're not entitled, you're not born to the upper crust, you don't have your daddy wasn't roommates with the governor type of thing, you can still run for office. So Judge Bucklew got appointed, and let me see. I always want to be careful with my chronology. Barbara Fleischer filed for county, and nobody ran against her. And she was one of my former colleagues at the state attorney's office. And then Debbie Benke decided to run against Jimmy Dominguez, who was a sitting county court judge, and she won. Oh, and Susan Sexton decided to run against Judge Sidwell, and she won. That was a circuit court seat. So Susan was somebody who'd been a prosecutor. Debbie Benke had been a prosecutor. Fleischer had been a prosecutor. And it just seemed like the time was right. If I wanted to wait until I was older and wiser to run for judge, there might not be as many openings. And I was able to run at a time where, at the height of the number of candidates that election season, there were 32 people running for judge. So when I first started running for judge, you'd take the microphone and they'd say, tell us a little bit about yourself, and like this, why did you want to be a judge and everything. And you could kind of talk until, you ran out of things to discuss. By the end of that campaign, they'd say, just tell them who you are and sit down.
Yeah, 32 names, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have enough time. I decided to run. Debbie Benke recommended her campaign consultant, so I hired Mary Repper. Mary Repper didn't really need to focus on judicial campaigns. They're not the big money campaigns. So she had this guy, Kenny Carpe, open an office in Tampa, and Kenny Carpe was going to do the judicial races. And having a consultant was great, except that they don't run your campaign. You still have to run it yourself. It's just somebody to give you good advice and tell you what vendors to use when you're ordering your t-shirts and your yard signs and everything. So it was really exciting. It made me go to places in Hillsborough County that I had never been to before. You'd go to every civic organization. You'd have neighborhood coffees where you could meet people. You concentrated a lot of your efforts in the areas where the super voters lived, like Sun City, down near where Cooley is. Mm-hmm. And so it was really a full court press. My whole family ran for judge. I had the support of my husband, and my kids, ended up helping me as well. My mom came down from Iowa, so whenever we did the first mailing to the absentee voters, Mom helped me with all of the envelopes and getting those materials out. So anyway, it was very exciting, and then I lost.
Oh, wow.
Back then, Florida had 2 primaries, and I lost to Chet Tharp. And I know you probably know Chet. And Chet's dad had been, I guess, the fire chief for the whole county. So Chet got the endorsement of all of the labor unions. And it was very close. I lost by less than a percentage point. And then because we have 2 primaries, a week later, I could requalify for a different seat. And so Judge Cavacles, who had been a county court judge at one point and then had resigned to run for Congress, Judge Cavacles and I both decided that we weren't going to take no for an answer. And so the following week, we qualified for a different race, Mort Hanlon's seat, because Mort had retired too late to be on the first ballot. And so Judge Cavacles and myself and 6 other people were on the second primary ballot. And I got the most votes, but I didn't get 50% plus 1 vote, which you needed. And Judge Cavacles got the next. So we ended up on the November ballot. And I ended up winning by, just like Chet, by less than 1%. Actually got to go down and see all those chads flying off of the punch card ballots that they had back then. So when we had all of that controversy about the chads, the count would change whenever they ran it through the machine, because more chads would fall out from where people had not completely punched out the little square. Mm-hmm. And so I think whenever they got 3 in a row that were the same, they declared me the winner. And we went to Village Inn on Del Mabry, and about 2:00 in the morning, we had our celebration at Village Inn. And that was the year I won. And then I was able to be reelected without opposition, I think 4 more times. Actually, I left the bench 2 years early because I was at the 28-year point. It was just a good time for me to go ahead and do my retirement.
So now let's go to the part where you give some advice for newer aspiring law students or new and aspiring attorneys based on all your experience. What is the little tidbit you'd like to leave them with?
Don't be afraid to ask, because some people don't want to show that they are ignorant or don't already know everything. But there's a lot of wonderful people out there like you who are willing to give them the benefit of their experience. Finishing law school is just the first step. Having a job and succeeding at a job, that's a whole new learning experience. And you really do need to be willing to show your ignorance and ask people, what do I do now? Where do I go? What door do I stand at? What is considered to be right and appropriate? And I remember we have kids that used to come from the Criminal Justice Academy at one of our local high schools, and they needed to be told what to wear. And I had a high school intern from one of our private schools come to court, and he was just so proud that he was at the courthouse. He turned around and took a picture of himself with the judge in the background. And he was very lucky he didn't get arrested, because we have rules, and those included no cameras in the courtroom unless you went through a process with court administration. And it was very embarrassing for me. I'd never thought to tell him, don't take a picture of yourself with Judge so-and-so, because I just assumed that he would know that he wasn't supposed to go in and make a social media event out of him getting to go to a felony courtroom. So I think that's the thing. Don't be afraid to ask, because then you give people the opportunity to help teach you and show you what they've learned. So that would be my first advice. My second advice is pay attention to the money, because I was fortunate. I had a government job where they helped me save for retirement. But if you're going to be what we call a single shingle, you need to make sure that you have a good handle on the numbers, or you have a bookkeeper or somebody who's going to help you. The Florida bar has no sense of humor when it comes to you messing up on your trust account. So you need to take advantage. The Florida bar has a really nice program for attorneys that you can take and find out about, law office management. So they have other programs as well that you can take advantage of. So find yourself a mentor within the organization that you're working for. Find yourself a mentor outside of that organization, because you don't want to be one of those people who's asked to do something that you consider to be unethical or unprofessional, and you don't have a person outside the organization to ask, is this the reputation I want to have? Mm-hmm. I know we have an attorney here who survived a very bad incident with the attorney he was working for. That attorney got in a lot of trouble ethics-wise, and his reputation was marred by what had happened with his boss, but he managed to survive it. But it took him a few years to kind of separate himself from the fact that he had worked with this attorney who had been unethical. So I guess be careful. It's your reputation, not theirs. Learn how to say no to a client. If a client asks you to do something that makes you uncomfortable or uneasy, or you think is just plain wrong, just decide who you are, because money does not mean so much that you're going to ruin your reputation or your self-esteem because they're willing to pay you to do something that you don't really believe is appropriate.
Great advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Judge Isom.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think your program is a wonderful program, and I'm so happy that people have been able to have your leadership and your role modeling. And I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you here today.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. So to our listeners, we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.